Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Integrity365 Insights podcast following the recent autumn budget. I'm Debbie Packer. I'm a chartered financial planner and a founding advisor for Integrity365, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleague Esther Clemmey. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yes, what a week it's been. So last Wednesday, we heard from our Chancellor Rachel Reeves, and she made her budget announcement. And I must be honest, me and Esther were talking beforehand, and just commenting on the lack of material that we have to cover for this podcast. I think we were all expecting quite a lot of outputs, and whether it's good news or bad news, I think that there's certainly only a few points that we've got to really go through. But the points we have got to go through, hopefully you will find interesting, and we'll try and bring them to life and share how these could impact on a number of you as we go through them. So I think the main emphasis on the budget that was announced last week was really about raising revenues over coming years. And it seemed to focus quite heavily on freezing thresholds, which will increase tax bills automatically as wages rise and people's value and salaries increase. There's also new taxes on wealth and assets, including high value properties and investment income. There's a restriction on generous reliefs such as salary sacrifice or salary exchange. And there was reform of gambling taxes, Motability rules, and energy bill levies. What have you found, Esther? Have you had many questions or many queries coming in post-budget?
Yeah, I think we all expected this to be a massive budget, massive impact. The media had hyped it up to be something perhaps that it never turned out to be. And whose fault that is can be up for debate. But certainly over the past few weeks, I think there's been a lot of uncertainty, a lot of speculation, and quite a lot of what they call flying the kite from the government, which is sort of testing policy ideas out in the media space. So because of that, I would actually say that from a financial planner perspective, we had a lot of queries coming up to the budget. There was a lot of uncertainty and confusion around the speculation. Certainly a lot of phone calls around pension tax-free cash, for example. There's a lot of concern around that. And I would say that my phone's actually got quieter since the budget, Debbie. I don't know about yourself, but there's been less queries, which is probably not the way we expected it to go. Probably the main query I've had so far from a couple of clients in the last few days has been around the changes to cash ISA allowances and whether that would impact their existing cash holdings, of which the answer is no. But that's really been my main one. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think on the lead up to the budget, I was getting a lot of queries about tax-free cash, allowances, what changes were going to be implemented. And I think the biggest changes in the pension space were actually the ones that were announced last October in the 2024 budget, which we still haven't seen the effects of yet, because that was the one that introduced pension funds into the inheritance tax calculations. But of course, that doesn't come in until April 2027. So I think we'll cover that a little bit later, because there are a few points I'd quite like to raise on there. I think the main one of the big impacts, which perhaps has gone under the radar a little bit, has been the freezing of the thresholds. And it's quite interesting because from the OBR report, which seems to have hit the headlines quite a lot when that was announced, the expectation is that by holding the current tax limits and tax thresholds until 2031, it's expected that by 2029 there will be 780,000 more basic rate taxpayers. There'll be 920,000 more higher rate taxpayers and 4,000 more additional rate taxpayers. And I think that's an increase in numbers than had previously been forecast in March. And I think that's probably where the main budget has been focusing on, raising revenues by almost by stealth, by keeping those bandings the same. And of course, we know that I don't know whether you've come across many queries about this, Esther, but we know that the rates are going up for dividends and for savings as well for savers. Have you had many queries around that?
Yeah, I've had a couple of conversations around it. I think it's one of those ones where, um, again, from a planning perspective, at this point, maybe isn't going to have a huge impact. It's really more, it's something that our clients perhaps can't actually avoid. You know, it can't get round in any way. It's just something that we're going to have to work with going forward. But certainly over, I mean, if you look at how tax changes have taken place over the last 10 years or so. I think this stealth taxing is nothing new. You know, we've
Yeah.
experienced a lot of it over the last 10 years, and those income tax thresholds, you know, really, had they changed in line with inflation, would be really quite radically different to what we see them being now. And I think the same also with dividend income. It's not so long ago that the dividend allowance was much higher and the dividend tax rates were extremely low. So I think, you know, these changes are not particularly radical in terms of what we've seen compared to recent years, and more of a continuation in the same direction, I suppose, from that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it feels like it's almost a little bit of an attack on business owners as well and entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
That seems to be a bit of a theme. So, just as a recap, it's an additional 2 percentage points on basic and higher rates of tax that will apply to dividend income from April 26. And then we'll also see property income increasing by a 2% percentage point increase on basic and higher rates, and savings income as well. So interesting there that sort of rental incomes and savings income will actually be at a higher level than income tax and earned income. I think that's perhaps a first, and something that maybe the current government are looking to continue to introduce. So that's just something a little bit different as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you've had much on the mansions tax, because
Mm.
that's something else that's being introduced as well after 2028. So yeah,
Yeah.
again, some additional taxation on property.
Yeah, I think mansion tax is an interesting one. I think there was a lot of talk in the approach to the budget about a wealth tax of some form, and really this is, I suppose, the only part of the budget that shouts that most close to what that was discussion was around. And I think there was concern that this would be on properties over 1 million. It's ended up being over 2 million. But that's still going to impact a lot of properties in the UK, particularly in the southeast, where we see much higher property values than in London, and sort of around in the home counties. I think the main question I've experienced so far, so I mean, just to recap on it, it's so that it's the so-called mansion tax is to be collected alongside council tax, and raising, well, they say about 400 million by 2031, with properties over 2 million facing an annual fee of 2,500, and then properties worth over 5 million facing an annual levy of about 7,500. I think the big question around this is how is it actually going to work in a practical sense? There's a lot of questions around how you perform a valuation. How is that valuation approved? You know, if you're sitting on that £2 million valuation point, that's going to be a very tricky position for property owners and potentially impact how those properties are valued and how they sell going forward. So that'd be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it is interesting actually, and I was reading an article about it that also said that the additional taxation wasn't going to go to local authorities, although it's collected
Okay.
alongside council tax. It's actually going to the main government rather than local authorities. So again, it'll be interesting just to see the dynamics on there, and how that is actually done in
How it
practice.
works, yeah, and how it's collected. And I think it is an interesting one in terms of 400 million sounds like a lot, but in a budget sense, really is quite a small
Yeah.
tax rate. So it's, yeah, it's an interesting choice, but we've got to work with it and see what comes out in terms of how it works.
Excellent. And I think you touched upon it earlier, Esther, as well. We were talking about the ISAs, and it's quite interesting actually. So again, stock and share ISAs, perhaps the ones that we get involved with and advise on and deal with. Not really many changes to do with the traditional stock and share ISA. Cash ISAs, we know the allowance is still remaining at 20,000 for clients that are aged over 65. We know that it's reducing to 12,000 for anybody that's below the age of 65 for a cash ISA. But of course, they can still use their full allowance in stocks and shares. And our understanding is that the lifetime ISA is going to be scrapped, but there is a consultation coming, I believe, that will look at an alternative for helping first-time buyers. Because as we've sort of spoken to various clients and we've experienced, it's really hard for that next generation to get on the property ladder, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the lifetime ISA side of things, I think it's a surprise really that they're scrapping the product, because I think, like you say, that it's really hard to get on that property ladder. They're trying to encourage younger people to do so, and without these incentives, it becomes even harder. So it's interesting that they're discussing that, but it does sound like they're looking to create some kind of new product, which is good, and maybe it would be an improved version of the lifetime ISA. Fingers crossed for those who it might be beneficial for, and maybe with less restriction that the lifetime ISA has. On the sort of cash ISA standpoint, the reduction in that to 12,000, I think, to be honest, is unlikely to have much of an impact on people's behavior. I think if people want to hold cash, they will continue to hold cash in a taxable account. But again, that remains to be seen. And certainly from a planning perspective, it's another 8,000 of the allowance, I suppose, towards the stocks and shares side of things. But again, I do think that if people want to hold cash, they will continue just to hold
Absolutely,
it.
yeah. Despite the tax rate going up by 2% as well after
Yeah.
2028, I think you're absolutely right. I mentioned earlier about just coming back to pensions. I say there was a lot of pre-budget speculation on what was going to happen and potential changes. The annual allowance is the same. Full tax relief on contributions still stands. And, I think the one message that I'd like to share with anybody that's listening to this and doing planning at the moment is, just make the most of those allowances while we have them. Nothing has been changed in terms of the contributions at the moment. There will be future budgets and announcements. We know that each year, but really make the most of that. Just as a reminder, anybody over the age of 55 currently, rising to 57 from April 2028, can still withdraw 25% of their pension tax-free, up to the existing cap, which is £268,275. So again, a lot of the speculation was around maybe reducing that. Some clients I know do have fixed or enhanced protection as well, if they were fortunate enough to protect their pension pots previously. So that hasn't changed. There is a bit of a stealth attack coming with salary sacrifice. Our esteemed colleague Craig Pritchard will be doing a corporate podcast on the budget changes. So do look out for that, because there are a few changes coming that way. But we'll let Craig talk about that and cover that in his podcast. Esther, what about the electric vehicles and fuel duty? Because there were a few announcements on that, weren't there, that may impact a few of our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's been a lot of incentive over the last probably 10, 15 years, trying to encourage people to get into buying electric vehicles, get a charger on their house, etc. And we've all seen them, and perhaps this is the first time that the government have taken a leaning towards actually removing some of that incentive in a way, by they've put a small levy basically on electric vehicles. The argument behind this is that due to increasing numbers of people buying and using electric cars, the government is receiving a lot less in fuel duty. So the idea is the fully electric cars should be charged 3p a mile from 2028, and that plug-in hybrids should be charged 1.5 pence per mile from 2028. They did continue to keep fuel duty frozen for another consecutive year as well. The electric car duty it's one of those ones, a little like the mansion tax. There's a lot of conversation around how is this going to be collected. So I think that will be interesting to see in the detail when they get there, whether people have to go in for an annual mileage check or how that will work. So Remains to be seen, Debbie.
Devil's in the detail, as it always is, isn't it? No, that's great. That's a great example. And there were a few other little nuggets. You can tell we're really sort of clutching at straws to try and pull together all of the information because there wasn't a huge amount in there. But training for apprentices under the age of 25 will be made free for small and medium-sized businesses. Again, that's kind of very forward-looking. I guess as well as young people come out of education, it helps the unemployment numbers as well if they do make these apprenticeships and training schemes available. But also it does help our economy and it does boost the workforce. So again, the Chancellor's committed an additional 820 million over 3 years on the youth guarantee scheme. So hopefully that will help a few people coming out of education. We also heard that the 2-child benefit cap will be scrapped, which is aiming to increase support for larger families from April 26. Prescription charges and rail fares will be frozen. And as you mentioned earlier, duties on fuel will be frozen as well. Duties on tobacco and alcohol will rise in line with inflation, and there will be reforms to gambling tax as well. So that's another area that the government are looking to raise revenues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the standout one of the, you've just mentioned there's the kind of lots of these little nuggets of information, but none of them are sort of huge planning ones. I think probably the one that stands out of the ones you've just gone through is that 2-child benefit cap being scrapped, which if you think about that from a long-term vision, from a sort of government planning perspective, I think the problem they're facing is the aging population and the less working population and the decline in the birth rate. And I suppose maybe some of the thought behind that is around encouraging people to have more children and support measures like the state pension, which are ultimately supported by people who are working. So it's an interesting one. Whether that will be brought back in by successive governments remains to be seen, doesn't it? But I don't think you mentioned, but also there's the qualifying period to live and work in the UK before being entitled to the state pension has been extended as well. So you have to have worked for 10 years, I believe, in the UK in order to qualify for it going forward.
Yeah, and the triple lock is still in place as well with that. So a very valuable benefit for all of those that are already claiming it as well, and certainly going towards the increasing cost of living that everybody's feeling at the moment. I think in summary, what this budget sort of entails and what it means is working individuals really should expect to pay more income tax over time, even though tax rates haven't changed, because the frozen thresholds will mean more of your earnings and savings fall into those higher bandings more quickly. Means tested benefits as well. Families with 2 or more children will see an increase in entitlement. Again, I guess that will, it may help, it may hamper, it just depends, because obviously there is that point where, if people are receiving benefits and they are substantial benefits, where is that drive and motivation to go to work? So again, it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Electric vehicle owners, running costs will increase slightly from 2028. We'll have to wait and see whether that has an impact on electric car sales. I think people that have made that transition and are very happy with their electric vehicles, I don't think that's a deal breaker, but maybe people that haven't quite made that change or that transition yet, that may put them off. But yeah, that's something else that's in the mix. Investors, I think to investors that aren't, that have investments and holdings outside of the tax-wrapped pensions and ISAs, there will be greater taxation on dividends, on savings income. And if you do have rental properties, again, I think the poor landlords out there, I think that's just another stick to beat them with, really. I think, that taxation increase on rental income as well is particularly tough. High value property owners, there are the new surcharges coming in from 2028, depending on the property values. But again, I think the preempting of that in the budget prior to last Wednesday. I think where it's landed, it's perhaps a little bit lower than people were perhaps initially anticipating. So hopefully that's not too onerous.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good summary, Debbie. Thank you. I think there's as always there's lots of detail behind everything that we've sort of spoken about, and there's bit areas that we haven't touched on, I suppose, in more detail, such as the changes to income tax relief on venture capital investment as the government tries to push people, I think, more towards enterprise investment schemes.
Yeah.
So, there's lots of detail to come out. And as ever, we kind of have to wait for that with all of the questions that we have as the consultations happen behind the scenes. But I think you're right. I think the impact of this will be felt much more gradually over the long term rather than a sort of immediate. I think possibly the public were expecting lots of big, immediate, massive tax changes, huge impacts, pension pots, etc. But it doesn't seem to be that. Some of the changes, we're looking as late as 2029, which is election year. So whether they will even come into play is going to be up for debate, and whether the election is in May 2029 or before that, will determine that as well. So I think, yes, there's some change, but I don't think there's any sort of immediate calls to action, really, is it? It's just continuing to take advantage of allowances that are already there whilst they remain.
Absolutely. And I think clients should take a lot of reassurance from that and also absolutely make the most of all of those planning opportunities that haven't changed. As we spoke about earlier, I mean, we will continue to review everything. And as information unfolds and as future finance bills become clear, we'll obviously keep all clients updated. If anybody that's listening has any specific queries or questions relating to the budget or any form of financial planning, then I just urge anybody just to contact your advisor, and obviously we'll do all we can to help and keep people updated. In the meantime, you can download our full PDF summary guide, which is available on our website, and we also have a number of other financial insight podcasts which cover a whole array of topics and subjects. But no, from me, Debbie, and I just want to say a big thank you, Esther, for coming on the call as well today and trying to unpick some of those points that were covered in the budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think as you say, lots of resources on our website and on our sort of Spotify and YouTube as well. So do go and check them out if you're interested. But if you've got any questions, get in touch with myself or Debbie or any of the other fabulous advisors which are listed on our website.
Thanks, Esther.
Thanks, Debbie.
Bye bye.